We started off kind of this unit with ethics, so I'm going to let Calvin and Jonathan start ethics.
I'm going
to move this a little back.
So do we need to come up here? So with ethics, be sure to know the difference between ethical egoism, utilitarianism, and altruism. Ethical-ism is best for me, utilitarianism is best for the most, and altruism is going to be best for others. Be aware of the 5 principles of ethical leadership, which are... Is it, what, no?
Just hold it, you're doing it.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll sit right there. Perfect. Be aware of the 5 principles, which are respect others, serve others, shows justice, and manifest honesty, builds community. And then the toxic triangle, which consists of destructive leaders, acceptable followers, and conducive environments. And that is related to pseudo-transformational leadership. Is there anything that we have missed?
So we did have a case study that had to do with ethics. So can y'all kind of talk about, maybe kind of talk about that case study and how we can remind ourselves how that case study helped us understand ethics?
I'm not aware of the case study.
Yeah.
The peanut butter dump case?
Oh, yeah. I think the plant had to, you talking about with this stuff right here?
Mm-hmm.
They had to do what was best for others, because the peanut butter wasn't like, it could have been something wrong with it or something like that. So in that case, they had to do this.
So one thing I would do is go back and look at that case study and be able to, like think back to when we had kind of the debate in class. Everybody represented a different stakeholder in that case study. To be able to have the conversation, like, okay, if you were Costco, you have 3 choices you can make, right? You can do what's best for you can do what's best for the most, or you could do what's best for others. So, be able to think through those 3 things. And to think through them, you've got to be able to describe what the options are, right? And then, what do you think should be done? I mean, we know what was done. It's an actual event, but if you could go back, what should be done? Do you agree with what they did, or do you think they should have done something else? So, kind of refresh yourselves too on that case study. But yeah, the 5 principles are really good. So we talked about that idea that with ethics, like we've got to have this moral piece. And why do we have a moral piece to leadership? Why do we talk about ethics? Because people can influence change, right? Leadership's about influence, but if we're not influencing positively, it's pseudo-transformational leadership. So they included up there that toxic triangle, know those 3 parts and what they mean, and then be able to say, like, if you don't see these 5 principles in a leader, you may have a leader, but not an ethical leader, right? So, yeah, good job, guys. Do y'all have any questions for them about ethics? Or things that are kind of, y'all are remembering now? All right. Good job, guys. Okay, so we talked about ethics and this idea that there's got to be a morality piece. And so then we kind of jumped into, after that, team leadership and followership. So we'd like team folks to go next. Who has team? I'll hang on to that.
It's going to be hard to see that part.
Do you want to start with you?
Sure. So teamwork is lateral decision making, like that's kind of what it is explained as in the book. Effective teams can bring more creative and innovative success to organizations. Then we did the chart that was on like the print off of like kind of the compare and contrast of teams and groups. So like groups work towards a common goal, but teams are like fully committed to the goal and like the mission. And like teams are shared leadership, where groups leadership is assigned to one person. And then teams have synergy, which is pretty much just they achieve more together than individually.
So then when you go on to page 374, it's a model made by Hill. There's more to it, but I couldn't fit it all in here. But it has that idea that you make 3 decisions when you're an effective team. When you're doing effective team leadership, and then it breaks down the internal and external, breaks down into a task relationship basis, which then allows you to go to team effectiveness. And it goes back to this chart of the idea that groups and teams, because groups are wasteful and ineffective to the bottom line of a company. So typically companies don't like to use groups because at the end of the day they're hurting them. But if you're having an effective team, then your performance and development for your company is higher, which goes back to that idea of synergy, that 2 + 2 = 5, and you're getting more for your company and out of your team and the group, or the team as a whole, instead of just having a group where one person is leading them.
Write that calculation down for synergy. Got it?
Yeah.
It's just kind of hard to read that marker.
Okay. And also a lot.
Same.
But then it goes back to that with groups, you have a manager and everybody's accountable to them, but in a team you have that lateral, everybody's on the same horizontal level, and then you are accountable to each other, and everyone is making sure that everyone else on the team is pulling their weight and doing their part, so no one's the clear bottom or top of the pyramid.
So what's the case study that we did in class related to teamwork? The Whole Foods. So can y'all think back to some of the specific things in that story about, well, that story is who they are, description of Whole Foods and their company. What were some examples of team leadership specifically from?
Everybody was like, every department was its own team. They got to make their decisions on what they wanted to have, like who they wanted to hire. And then it was also that like the CEO works like kind of like alongside him. He doesn't really hold himself above everybody else. And like I said in there, how he described like it as a team. Like he didn't want it to be just groups. He wanted them to work together and not one person be in charge of them.
Do y'all remember like about salary? Like what was the crazy thing? They kind of decide what they all get paid, but then like what's the thing about like CEOs and
how much they make is open policy, isn't it?
it's open policy, so everybody can see what everybody makes. So the team decides what people get hired at, but the CEO can't make how much more for team. So how does that tie into teamwork or team leadership? Why is that an example of that? Doesn't separate him from everyone else, so it ties in that idea of shared leadership. Yeah. So, and it's definitely something that's like really unique to them. Not a lot of companies do that. So, and it's also kind of that idea that, well, if you want to make more money as a CEO, you're going to find ways to make more money so everybody makes more money, right? Because you may be increasing your salary, but you can't make 14 times more. So if you want to increase, other people are going to increase their salaries too.
I still feel like 14 times, like, a whole lot.
Yeah. When you think about it, it's still a lot. The difference is when you really start to get into like the people who make the millions versus the person making $20,000. You know, it kind of keeps that from happening. But it's still, you still have people making way over $60,000.
You're making just like $26,000 a year, which is no wage employee. So 14 times that, you'd be making about $365,000.
And I mean, could y'all say, like, do y'all think that there is a point with salaries where enough's enough? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. So what do y'all think?
It depends on the job.
Well, it seems like what I've noticed, the higher up you go in the company, the less, you take more responsibility to do less work. That makes sense.
Think back to skill theory. You're responsible more for those conceptual things than technical skill, right? Like the responsibilities change.
But you gotta take a look what's harder, you know.
exactly. I think there's also like a societal context that you get left out there because the more money you make, the cost of living for your life goes up. So like it goes back to like if you were to make a case study about that, it could be minimum wage and like how everyone wants minimum wage at $15 an hour, but they don't understand when you raise minimum wage, that raises the cost of living. So you have to, when you raise minimum wage, you have to raise the price of everything else to offset that new higher price. So that just becomes the new low. So there's no difference between $7.25 and $15 an hour because everything has to raise to offset that.
That's looking at one variable.
Yeah.
And it, you also have taxes in there. You also have, I mean,
That's what I
it's
think.
a
Like,
piece of the puzzle,
Missouri
but there's a lot of
transportation.
a lot of other reasons that cost of living increases too.
I think when it goes in, it's like Oklahoma passed our liquor laws, so the percentage goes up. But I mean, everything went up. Our taxes for wholesale, like it really destroyed small businesses in return of just a percentage of something going up. I think that's a good example of high versus low.
It's like a big spider web. Like and I'll say that's one thing. Like even economists will say, like when they're doing an economic evaluation of something, they're usually looking at one factor's effect on one thing, when really there's like 10 different things. And you pull one way, and it's going to pull everything else a different way. So sometimes it's hard for us to just isolate one reason for a cause of something. We have to look kind of at the big picture of everything. And yeah, and that's why that conversation is really, really hard. Is because we can see a lot of direct correlations individually, but when we start putting it all in the bucket together, it's a little bit harder to make sense of it. We don't know it right now.
What does $15 an hour end up being? 35,000 a year.
Has anyone ever calculated like what you make a year minimum wage? If you work 40 hours a week?
Didn't Jason say 27?
Like so then, well, and I mean not to get on that conversation what you do, but like if we say the effect is okay, if you lower it, it raises the cost of living, but we know that that's well below poverty line, then what do you do? Do you see how this now becomes an ethical leadership conversation?
Missouri just raised theirs to $12.
Huh?
Missouri, in the last election, they voted and passed $12 an hour for minimum wage. And so now everybody's like, if I got paid $12 an hour, do I get paid more because that's now minimum wage and it wasn't a minimum wage job?
So I would say if the answer for the again, this is just, I don't know the answer, I don't know my opinion today. But is the answer for the government to raise minimum wage, or do you do what Hobby Lobby does? And it doesn't, they pay $15 an hour. They've chosen as a company to do that. And you don't have to work on Sundays. Chick-fil-A pay starts at $10 an hour.
So Taco Bell starts
Like there's a lot of reasons why people choose to work at Chick-fil-A versus, I mean, so whose responsibility is? Okay, yeah, I don't know. But that's, I mean, it is that, like, which is going, if you're ultimately wanting to provide a wage where people aren't living in poverty, what's the way to approach that?
I still feel like even $15 an hour, if you're trying to support a family, you can't do
It's weird. You would think when you put two people together and earn more income that it's hard, especially the cost of having kids. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. We can talk about that trivia, but it's a good point to bring up. So, followership. Are there any questions on teams before we go off of that? And I feel like y'all know what to focus on team leadership wise. Followership. It also ties into the idea of locus of control, right? The external or internal. Okay.
Do you want to talk?
Go for it.
Okay, so we have followership, and so we defined it. It's a process where an individual accepts the influence of others to accomplish a common goal. So it's important that you know that it's role and relational based, and it's super important that you realize that followers can play a harmful role in organizations. So followership, why this was kind of a change is that it acknowledges the central role that followers play, which wasn't previously a focus of leadership studies. And then followership is how followers and leaders construct leadership. It's a co-created process. Followers have a mutual influence. Leadership is a result of their interaction, and this process affects the different outcomes. And then in the book, it talked about how Hitler was a destructive leader, but people still followed him. So from a followership standpoint, how is he able to do that?
What do y'all think? I think they did a good job. This was one that there's a lot of nitty-gritty in the book. We didn't have time because of just stuff to get to that nitty-gritty, so I would say y'all did a good job of covering the highlights. Big thing is understand that we want to study this because we realize that followers are part of the leadership process. It is in that definition. You can't be a leader if you don't have followers, right? And it's this idea that the role followers play in that process helps construct. So I like that you underlined that. I can't be an effective leader if the followers I'm working with aren't effective followers. As a follower, if you think you have an ineffective leader, how can you change that? Or being a more effective follower, you would hope, right? Because if leadership is truly that reciprocal process, you have the same amount of influence on that process, whether you're the follower or the leader. I think that that's really empowering. I don't know about y'all, but I think that's a cool perspective change that I have absolutely loved in recent leadership research. I think it's really cool. Catherine got to see me geek out a couple weeks ago about it with something else. It won't come out. Anyways, yeah. Any questions for them about followership? All right. Let's go then to back in the room to motivation.
I'll hand off to him.
It's a lot to write down. I'm going to read most of it, what it is, but this is your points of what to look up. So motivation, what it is, it's why people do what they do. And then you have intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation, internal motivation and external motivation. And then we have our 5 theorists. So McGregor was the X and Y theory, and X is people avoid work if they can. So we talked about if our class was an X theory, then it takes a lot of motivation from our teacher to succeed. And theory Y people love work, and that would be we all come to class because we genuinely want to know about theories. We want to learn about it. We don't have to have motivation to do our homework or study. And then Maslow's a hierarchy of needs. So your 5 needs, it's the pyramid. And the bottom is sociological, and then safety and security, love and belongings, self-esteem, and self-actualization. And in order for us to move up in the hierarchy, we have to complete the one before that. And then Herzberg is hygiene and motivators. Into the hierarchy of needs. So hygiene is a dissatisfier, and when missing it, you're dissatisfied. So if you don't eat breakfast, it's harder for you to learn, or if you have a shortage of food or no access to food, it's harder for you to succeed in your goals. And then motivators are extrinsic things that spur you on. And then McClendon's, the acquired needs. And those are need for power, achievement, and affiliation. And then Skinner is positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. And behavior is controlled by that. So behaviors which are rewarded tend to be repeated, and behaviors that aren't rewarded aren't repeated. And then the meta theory of motivation, what we did this morning, it's our 5 sources: an intrinsic process, instrumental motivation, self-conceptual external, concept internal, and then goal internalization. And then the MSI's motivation sources inventory, what motivates you. So there's 5 subskills and 6 to each. And that's intrinsic, instrumental, external, internal, and goal.
All right, awesome. Yeah, there's a lot with motivation, and so
Yeah.
I know there's like not enough room on the board to write about it. So the big thing, if y'all remember back when we talked about the 5 theories in class, we defined what the theory was. We had you kind of describe the theory you were at, which was connected to intrinsic motivation, which was connected to extrinsic, so remind yourself of that. And then we had, okay, based on that theory, how would you respond to trying to motivate someone? So I would expect like application question with motivation for sure. Like I want y'all to be able to connect. This is probably the one time in class that I probably care that you know who the theorist is and what their theory is. Just because motivation, if you're in education, if you're in business, like you're going to see this more. So I do think it's really important that you know, if you hear someone talk about Maslow's, you need to be able to know its hierarchy of needs. So I would say this is probably the one time in class that I really care you know somebody's name with it. But then know, like, how does intrinsic and extrinsic weave itself in and out of all of that? And then, like I said, you know, I should be able to give y'all some scenarios, and based off of like what happens in that scenario, you tell me this was an example of someone motivating or someone being motivated by, according to Herzberg, or according to theory XY. So that may be where I would say you could help each other out the next few days, is like be thinking of some examples. The more examples you can think of personally, the easier you're going to be able to transfer that into an example you haven't seen before. I also come up with funny ways to remember things. So like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We'll come there next. But like Herzberg, I remember that Herzberg is the 2-factor theory because the Z looks like a number 2. Y'all ever do things like that to remember stuff? Okay, so there's one that maybe works. I remember McClellan is acquired needs because in his name is AN, acquired needs. Is that in anybody else's? Yeah, so that's how I can remember that. I remember Skinner is reinforcement theory because Skinner was the guy that, like, in psychology you learn about him, like, seeing the dog, right? Mm-hmm. So I think about Skinner's dog, which makes me think of positive reinforcement. So Skinner must be reinforcement theory. Can y'all think of one for theory XY, how you can remember McGregor? I think of you're given 2 options for something. You can either choose X or you can either choose Y, right? Mitch, Gregor, there's 2 parts to his name. That may be a stretch. And I won't get that confused with McClellan because what's unique about McClellan's name?
It has an A in it.
He has an A and N, acquired needs. Maslow, hierarchy of needs. How could you remember that one?
I always say, like, I'm stupid at this, but ER is always slow.
The ER is always slow. Hierarchy, ER is always slow. Maslow. Good play on words. I kind of like that. Jenna won't forget it. She's going to get that question right on Thursday. But again, our examples may not work for y'all, but it's something that helps me make those connections. Another thing with motivation, I kind of mentioned to y'all that the reason why we talk about these big picture things now is because they're usually built, they're not specific leadership theories, but they contribute to a lot of the theories we've talked about. So I want y'all to be able to make those direct connections back with previous theories. So, today we talked about how locus of control can be directly connected back to emotional intelligence, because it talks about emotion, self-regulation, so that's trait theory, right? Think about again, like where have we seen motivation before with leadership theory? Path goal, right? So be able to come up with some examples and explain. And maybe you just focus on one. Maybe you say, yeah, I see this connection. Go back and read about that theory and be able to really explain why you see that connection between motivation and that leadership theory. Okay? All right. Locus of control. Y'all are last.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
So for locus, the main things that it's external, internal, and motivation is close to a person's locus of control that they have. For external, they don't perceive like a high control of their lives. They believe that fate, power, luck, and religion affect them. Internal, they take more risks, they set harder goals, they're less conforming and less anxious. And it also can be changed. You can change from being easier to change from being internal to external control. So that was like the main points from that.
What did y'all think of locus of control today?
It really ties back to motivation, like whole internal and external.
To me, it's like we want to, like in anything, we want to get people to do what we want them to do, and ultimately we want them to be intrinsically motivated. We want them to just be choosing to do what they're doing, right? But if we don't address locus of control, it's hard to ever get there. To me, it's one of those that, like, when I first learned about it, it just seemed so intuitive. It was like a duh. But I had never had like terms to put with it until I realized that there was this whole framework, and all of this research was really cool to me, because it just explained a lot of human behavior that up until that point I really didn't have a good explanation for. So I thought it was pretty cool. Make sure you know the characteristics. So we didn't spend a ton of time on that today, but it's on the slides, the characteristics of, why do we, this is one of those that ultimately we want people to have more of an internal locus of control. Like, if we know from research, if people have high external locus of control, that means they're only going to be motivated by intrinsic things, and that's not going to be sustainable, right? Like, that's not going to have long-term motivation. So when we look at motivation theory, we do want people to have a higher sense of internal locus of control, right? So we need to know those characteristics of both, because that helps us provide an explanation for why. Internal locus of control people are less anxious. They have more job satisfaction. They tend to arise as leaders in groups because of those things. It's really hard to be an effective leader if you have an external locus of control. So make sure those are things that are pretty straightforward. So that's why we didn't harp on it in class, I would say. Any other thoughts about locus of control?
I have a question real quick. What was the other theory, emotional intelligence, and what's that connected to that?
So internal locus of control is that idea of expectancy theory. Mm-hmm. And that's where I don't want to confuse y'all, but like literally these motivation theories are like 5 foundational, and there's probably actually like 3 more we could study in this class, and we just don't have time. Expectancy theory is one of them, but it's that idea that if I do this, I expect to get this. And so that goes back to path goal. In path goal theory, as a leader, you understand that your followers are going to be motivated to do something if they know they're going to achieve this outcome. So your job as a leader is to help remove obstacles or provide the rewards needed to help them get what they expect to get. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's a connection path goal theory is connected to locus of control through expectancy theory, but then it also pulls in that idea of, well, you're talking about providing extrinsic factors, so can you ever make someone really see the questions that start to come out? And this is why we don't know everything in the world yet. But we're building piece by piece, right? External is connected to attribution theory, or attributes. So you are explaining that things happen not because you expected it to happen, but because of something externally happening. You attribute the reason to something external, not to the expectancy. Does that make sense? So I would just remember internal, expectancy, external, attribution. And these are like really I would say locus of control is a pretty popular thing that even if you're like, okay, I need a different way to understand that, I don't get on YouTube videos and things, because it's just such a foundational concept that you can find some cool stuff on it. So really, good job, guys. I mean, y'all covered, I have the exam in my hand. So I've been sitting here making sure y'all covered everything that you need to cover. The exam is going to be like really similar to the other ones in that like a good chunk of it's going to be multiple choice. And then you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 like short answers and then a matching. And then I think based off of some of the stuff y'all talked about here today, because y'all actually included something that I forgot to put on the exam, I think I'm going to make that an extra credit question. And it's something we did today. So it should, I'm hoping it's kind of a give me. Okay. I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, y'all mentioned both case studies, so like revamp yourself with that. Anything that has a model could be probably one of the short answers, you know, like a very obvious shape of something. Yeah, I don't know. I think y'all are gonna find that this exam is a little bit easier, but the reason why is it's not that it's easier content. Do y'all feel like this is easier content than what we've done? No, y'all are starting to integrate. Like all that theory that we did, you're starting to, I would hope, see it all integrated. And so now you may be feeling like some of it is kind of like, oh, well, this is straightforward. Well, that means y'all have taken a step forward in the learning process. So, anyways, all right. If y'all have questions for me, let me know.
Psychotransformational. Oh no.
Conducive.